Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to CIBC Presents Entrepreneurship 101. Tonight's topic continues on our theme of building teams, human relations, and execution of your great plans. Human capital, building high-performance teams for your startup business. We're privileged to have tonight's speaker, Lance Laking. I've known Lance for a number of years. He has a BA in accounting and economics from the University of Waterloo, and you know I don't hold it against accountants. And I was excited because I just read he completed the quantum shift program at UWO, and I thought, yes, some chemistry and physics. Actually, tell the truth, it's even better than that. It is a very select group of executives, entrepreneurial executives, 40 across the country, who are invited into a program at the Ivy School of Executive Development. So, not quantum mechanics, but pretty damn good nonetheless. Lance is he is a business, an EIR, entrepreneur in residence here at Mars. Right now, but I guess my connection with Lance goes back to his management and growth as CEO of a high-tech company in the, telecom photonics area up in Ottawa. High-growth, successful company. Lance played a major role in growing that company, and I'm not going to go into background before that. I will look now to the fact he is president of Single Track Performance Management, Inc., and that provides consulting services to private companies, range of industries, and it's really helping companies, I'm reading here, plot, plan, execute, and measure results related to strategy, business scaling, new market entry, financing, and organizational development. And I think what's integral to all of that is having a team that can execute, and that's really where we have asked Lance for several years now to come and talk about building those high-performance teams. So, Lance, over to you.
Thanks very much. I'm happy to be here and welcome everybody. Just to help me a little bit with context, if we could maybe have a show of hands, first of all looking at how many folks in the room are, say, later stage academics that have entrepreneurial dreams and want to start a business. How many of those would be the kind of cross-section, okay? And how many people are in existing companies, small, that are growing and growing up, okay? And do we have folks in the room that are in larger organizations that they see some opportunity maybe to spin out or do something entrepreneurial, or we've got that cross-section a little bit as well? Good stuff. Good. I think I'll talk a little bit more about my specific focus and lens as we talk about teams, and I thought just as a cover here as the intro slide, talk about a team that was maybe under a little bit of duress when they first played the Americans, but at the end of it, it was a pretty big event for all us Canadians glued to the TV watching that particular little bit of excitement, and I don't know whether we can draw analogies between sports teams and business teams. Probably you can and you can't, but that's certainly, that analogy has been drawn by a lot of business professors. I think of, say, Dr. Peter Jensen at Queen's University is a real classic business prof that is all about high performance team and team stuff. If you ever want to Google him and look at some of his writings, they're really great. So I'll give, similar to what I talked about in last year and the year before. I hope there's not any repeat customers here that that see some of the overlay, but for all the newcomers, there's going to be obviously all fresh and new. I'll put a little bit of a contextual backdrop to what we'll talk about. I'm going to talk specifically about teams, structure, and what I think works for a smaller company that is in a high growth or high growth potential market and where they're going. I'm going to, obviously, part of building a team is the hiring process. So not to repeat on the March 24th session that was here in the room that I think was a little bit more focused on maybe hiring process, hiring legality, the tactical aspects of it, and maybe the regulatory aspects of hiring. I'm going to talk more about getting the right people on the bus and that side of it. And then a couple of comments around culture, because once a team is in place, it's all about culture and starting to row in the same direction and so on. So I'll talk a bit that way. From a communication style point of view, I'll speak to it from my experience leading either a company or leading a team, and as opposed to maybe the communication style of a person within a team, but there's probably some analogies there that can be drawn. From a compensation and benefits point of view, we are all in our various business endeavors, I think, as part for profit and for some kind of reward. So I'll talk to the compensation side of team and team building. And then one slide on advisory boards, because I do think teams are not necessarily just within the organization itself, but you can have expanded team dynamics by pulling in outside expertise, either via an advisory board, or in some cases it might be a channel partner or a strategic partner that is part of the de facto team. So a couple of comments there, and then we'll wrap it up. So I'd say about, say, 30, 40 minutes or so, and then fire off all the questions you want my way. And if you want to talk about, the Maple Leafs not making the playoffs or anything like that, we can probably talk about that a little bit too, since I reside in Ottawa, and I think the Ottawa Senators will have some postseason play. So Tony, thanks again for the backdrop. I come into tech companies a little bit different than maybe a typical founder, entrepreneur of a technology-rich company, in that a lot of times that is based on an engineering background. So I come in with a business background and a finance background. But I've done things from small partnerships, building a company, building a team, growing that company, and taking it public via reverse takeover onto the Toronto Stock Exchange, taking a piece of that same company and selling it to a multinational, Swiss-based company, and worked inside that larger organization with a little bit of global experience around that. And then, as Tony referred, I have been inside a very high-growth venture capital-backed company that went through successive rounds of raising VC and playing into the telecom market against the sort of David versus Goliath type story, which I can refer a little bit to. But now the shift that I've made in the last year and a half has been one where I'm certainly involved here in a lot of EIR capacities with very small teams where there's one guy and his dog, or there's a team of 3 that might have a very sort of focused domain expertise on the science side and want to build a business, or combinations thereof. So that's my Mars experience, clean tech and ICT companies. I just invested in an Ottawa company that's in the IT professional services space, which is another kind of neat team experience, because it was a succession-based acquisition where myself and another investor bought into this company, took out the majority shareholder who was old and tired and hadn't kept the company to its potential. And so that's a new thing for me of rebranding, rejuvenating, re-energizing a team, and that's the TRM technology side. and experiences around that. So that's all sort of part of the context and the backdrop of what I see. That typical playing field, for me, has been very technical product in a number of companies, a very typically technical sales process, so a long sales process that you're dealing with. A lot of times, a lot of barriers to enter into the market. Most of my experience has been business to business. I haven't done sort of the consumer market selling experience, and so my retail experience is only as a consumer as opposed to being the business side of the consumer market. And all the companies I've been involved with, I would characterize as being in high growth markets. Even the optical Ethernet market in the 2001 to 2005 range, although that market had pretty much gotten its butt kicked pretty hard, it was a high growth market for a company that is coming out of the starting blocks and grabbing market share. So you can still be in a relatively mature, slower growing market, but be a high growth company if you're grabbing lots of market share. So those are the sort of viewpoints that I come from. So what are high performance teams and what are maybe some of the key characteristics? I think the four that I could kind of pull together and see as apropos to the team would be every high performance team has to have a really strong communication basis. They have to be able to communicate openly. There can't be any sort of hidden agendas. You have to be able to get your opinion across. People have to be, treated as equals with their opinions respected and so on, that sort of thing. And you need diversity. You can't all be tacting on one opinion set. It's great to have a contrarian inside that team. The communication channels have to be open and without any control there. I think the second component of a high performance team is alignment, and that is getting aligned, first of all, on a very focused, targeted set of goals. You can't have 10 goals, and you can't have one part of the team running that way and one part of the team running in another direction. So it's get those 3 focused goals down and track them. And so once you have those goals determined, it's all about going back on a regular basis and how are we doing against those 3 goals, and do those 3 goals need to be modified as we get new information in and so on. So the planning aspect of that tracking and organizing is super key. And to the plans and the teams that I've been involved with, it's not always just having that one plan, because I guarantee you there will be speed bumps and there will be curveballs, and it's that ability for a team to have the responsiveness to such adversity, the ability to make a hard right turn when you didn't expect it, and that sort of thing is where the plan B is super important, and that aspect of a high performance team. And then finally, it's delivery. It's all about execution, and to that, probably the most significant example I have of that is within a venture-backed company, where you have venture capital investors that have a very strong desire for the company to succeed, but they also have a very strong expectation, and they don't mind, if need be, they'll come in with a stick as opposed to always coming in with a carrot. So you have to keep that in mind as well. So delivery is super important. Inside technology companies where I've been involved, they may have started out with that nucleus of 2 engineers, but as the company grows, you get functional diversity. So you have the concepts of, you have a sales group and a marketing group, and you have an administration group, and then you have sort of related to the company, the shareholders or the investors, the management team. And so you have all these different functional areas inside that team. And man, we hope that all those teams aren't siloed, doing their job, getting the information, throwing it over the wall, and hoping that the next group catches it and that things come together and miraculously product and sales comes out the end of the machine. So the objective with all these multi-functions is to drive for convergence, and I think that's again part of the whole team experience. So let's try and stay away from silos. Let's drive towards convergence. My experience coming into BTI was one where the company was just in the process of closing a Series A venture round. It had a strong intellectual capital base that had been both homegrown and acquired from academic institution and some NRC, National Research Council research, and it had inside the company, I think it was 25 or 30 employees, of which 18 of that 25 or 26 were PhDs in optical physics. And I arrived, and I was an operations sales management guy, and I had a company full of white lab coats and very smart but very deep science people who were working in the labs and working on these products from a project basis. And their idea of company building was get funding, work on the project, and somebody will buy it. And so to that, we had fresh venture investors who said, okay, time to put our foot on the gas and let's commercialize this and take it to market. So I overlay a sales and marketing organization, and suddenly you have engineering and you have sales and marketing, and do these, do we have oil and water, or how do we marry this and drive for the goal of successful commercialization? So the reference, is this Venus and Mars or is it not? And so when I think a little bit more about that, and I think about the Venus versus Mars aspect of a technical team and what excites them and what makes them, interested, and what's their motivation, is it's that peer recognition of engineering discovery and science. It's a number of published papers. It's speaking engagement at the greatest trade show on the planet for that particular line of science. It might be the technical challenge of trying to, solve cold fusion or something like that. And then on the other side of the equation, when you have, say, a pure salesperson, that salesperson is all about, let's go out, get the order, win the business, make money. So it's a coin operated, how much is in it for me, what's my commission, how much am I going to get when I take this and make sales? So you have such different motivating factors for these two key groups inside your company that you're trying to be cohesive and successful together. But if you step back from it and you say, well, maybe we're not all that different, because if you really look at it, there's always that human factor of contribution, that human factor of feeling that your efforts are respected and feeling that you are important to the organization, of garnering that respect from your fellow employees. And if you relate it to what you're trying to do from a product or a development point of view, you can be either on the bench side of engineering and development or on the sales and marketing side, but being on budget, on time, getting product to market is a common goal. Winning a new customer is a very common goal, and getting customer feedback on product and performance and technical shake and bake and comparison versus what's out there in the market, that's a common thing that everyone can get excited about. So at the end of the day, everyone likes to work around companies that have successful products, I would think. And all sales teams want to do is sell winning products. And so there is a lot of commonality if you look at it from that perspective. So a couple of observations or my my perspectives on helping to foster teamwork or build it to a point where it's really really gelling is one where I really believe in trading notes. And by that I mean when the sales and marketing organizations are out in the field and gathering information on competitors, on product acceptance, on new requirements, on trends and all that sort of thing, driving that back into the development engine is super important. And likewise, when the development team feel that they have key differentiating value sets and performance attributes in a product, putting that into sales speak and getting that across to the sales team is super important. So that importance to trade notes and get that interaction is one that is critical to make it work. My second point on pushing decisions to where the expertise resides is one where, although you don't want to be siloed, you certainly don't want your sales team making key chief technology officer decisions inside a company. And you don't want, so you want that where that best capability of expertise resides, that's where you want the decision that relates to that being made. I'm a strong believer on that. I don't believe in trumping a product manager on his or her decision to go after this niche market versus another, because that's where the expertise resides. The third point, which I think I learned and reinforced certainly by experience, was the super importance of product line management. And I would encourage, as you look at building up a company and building the organization where you have your development and you have your intellectual property, and then you think, well, we just need to get some sales guys and then we'll take it out, that there's a big gap between the engineering and development side of things and the marketing side of things, and that gap is filled by product management. And I think that it's a critical role, and it's an underappreciated role. And on any sort of technology-oriented company that I would be involved with, I look at that as a super important interface to those two teams. To help accomplish that, things that I've used successfully in the past have been taking select development team members and visiting customers, and having that capability for the technical people to see, how a purchasing or a sales perspective of the buying process and product, product introduction to the market rolls out. And at the same time, when the salespeople or the marketing people are around, you bring them into the lab, you have them do final characterization and test, even though you'll probably have to rework the product because they'll screw it up. But you get them at the bench, and you get them, for example, we had salespeople, we'd come in and we'd have them splice an optical fiber, which if you've never done that before, chances are you'll do a terrible job at it, but you'll appreciate the complexity of it, and you'll appreciate some of the nuances of the product, and there's a sort of respect that gets earned on those sort of different functional jobs, and it's not one where the salespeople can then just say, just add this into the product. You can do it, even though perhaps the signal processor is already at capacity and you just can't put that extra function in or something like that. So that it's that cross-pollination of experience set that has really worked well from some things I've done. So now switching over a little bit to some comments on hiring. So here we have kind of definitions on team and some of the good things we want to have around team. How do we get the right people onto the bus? How do we help ourselves to make sure that works? Again, I'll repeat on bring in product marketing early, and bring in sales, and bring in, as early as you can, HR functionality into the organization. So many of the young companies that we see now coming into Mars for assistance have a real strong core on the engineering side, or they have the science and the technical background, but they really lack that sales and marketing capability in the management team, and they discount any requirement for human resource assistance. And it doesn't mean you have to hire these functions in a full-time capacity. Sometimes they can be brought into a very young company from a consulting or a part-time capacity. When I make a point about having a hiring plan, really force rank the requirements that you need for the team that you're building. So it might be that you are out at an event and you meet someone and it's the most impressive operations and test person you ever met, and you think that would be a fantastic person to have on the team. But if operations and test is, 4 steps removed from the first 3 that you have to do in the order of operations to get where you want to go, then don't fool yourself. Really stick to that ranking of the hires that you have to make, and even if it means passing up on some strong candidates in other domains. When I say, obviously, try to hire the best you can, that's no rocket science there. But the message around that is try to always have choices. So when you are interviewing and looking for candidates, it's always great to have at least 2 at the table, because chances are you will get super excited and be convincing yourself again and again, yep, this is the right one, this is the right one, and you'll be really driving in to close and bring that person into the team. But you tend to start to forgive on the shortfalls and amplify the strengths of that particular person. And so having choices right down to the end on that hiring process is super important in my opinion. Inside a company, when there's so many dynamics about team around culture and communication style and working with others and that sort of thing, the attitude versus pure academic credentials are really, really important. I hired a PhD in optics with super strong expertise that appeared in automated manufacturing capabilities, and we wanted to take a very manual process and turn it into sort of a robotic-based process. And this particular individual was coming from the Eastern Bloc, Romania, I think it was, and we had no opportunity to check on the academic credentials, but the resume was like fall over deep of this university, this degree, this. And it was like, wow, we've got a rock star here. And so brought the person in on that premise, and it turned out that person was actually building their own library of capabilities, including the capabilities of intellectual property inside our company, and left our company and went to a major competitor company. And it was about 3 months later that I got a call from that competitor, a very reputable competitor, I would say, and they said to me, we think that we have some of your drawings, some of your design, and some of your capabilities. And so that was a real strong example to me where, holy smokes, let's focus on, attitude and the credentials of trustworthiness and good old human factor things, as opposed to straight, what's this resume look like? Big company versus small company. As you go out, and it's great if you are going to go into a market and compete with Microsoft, and there's 4 particular candidates that have worked inside Microsoft and Google and Oracle and Sun and IBM, and you think, wow, wouldn't it be great to have these people inside the company? Well, be careful. You have to really test that big company versus small company scenario. I like to really drill down and cross-interview those candidates and find out whether or not, why do you want to work in a small company? What's the advantage on your side? And what are your expectations? Because a lot of times it might be that sort of talk the talk. Yeah, I'd love to work in a small company, but then they get there and go, well, how do we get this? Where's the resources for that? Where's this? Where's my benefit for that? Where's this? You know, because they just so foreign to them inside small company environments. So be careful with the big company experience. It's not always the be-all and end-all. Of course, the flip side is that you want to build this company and sell to Microsoft, and you want to sell to Google or something like that. And so having someone who has those linkages, has that experience, knows the processes, and so there's always trade-offs, and you have to make a hard call there. I think that on the March 24th event, there was commentary about the hiring tools that you can use, and there was some reference to use social networking tools. Strongly endorse that. And the one that's worked fabulously for me has been LinkedIn, but there's, you know, obviously the whole suite of other more friendly social tools like the Facebooks and so on. I've also been burnt by director and investor referrals. Well, you should really hire this person who's really great, worked at this company or something like that. And yeah, you have to, you make the final call, because that person ultimately will be on your bench and have responsibility to deliver inside your team. And the fact that they maybe had the right team dynamics in another company and impressed an investor or a director there are not always indicators that it's going to happen again and again in other situations. So it has to feel good inside your gut on those kind of referrals, even if your arm's getting twisted a little bit to say, oh, you should really hire here. So not to replay some of the specifics and legalities and regulatory issues around hiring, just the two key points that I would reinforce around that is do employment contracts right up front, do them early, do them from the start, do them from employee number one, and cover off the key things like full comp, the termination, the severance issues, and certainly IP protection and confidentiality. You know, those are table stakes. Too many times that's left as something I'm going to do later. Come on, let's get working. We're busy. We've got to get this out. We have an opportunity 3 months from now. We've just got to work on it. Come on in. And just get the right, you know, cross the T's and dot the I's on employment agreements up front. That's for sure. And the sort of connection to that is that classic employee versus consultant side of things. A very tangible example I've seen just recently is a software company, again in part of the Mars family here, who have had 3 superstar development engineers on the software side that have been paid as consultants for the past year. And now the company is taking in first investor money, and the investors are saying, okay, we want to lock these consultants into the company to have that part of the critical team. And so there's the process of converting consultants over to paid employees. And so the consultants obviously are looking at, wow, I was getting paid gross, no withholdings. I'd put in a monthly invoice. I was getting paid for all my overtime, just putting in my bill. You know, life was good. I was getting this all flowing. And now, okay, so now I've got 40% withholding. I'm getting paid a fixed salary with no overtime. And, oh, I've got a bonus at the end of the year if we might hit this. And, oh, here's some stock options. And so the contractors are going, forget it, man. I'm staying as a contractor. Meanwhile, the investor and the company that's trying to preserve this precious new cash coming in is trying to convert. And so it's a real exercise to do that. And there are benefits to being employees versus contractors, but you really have to look at that before the case is that you're not necessarily going to get a 40% salary reduction contractor versus full-time employee. And so just be careful there. it comes back to bite you if you don't pay attention to it. So around culture, every company, full stop, has a culture. And so you might, well, we just work here. We just do our stuff, get it done. It's not really, culture isn't really part of us. Every company has a culture. You learn your culture from, the lunchroom, from what customers perceive you as, what suppliers perceive you as. And as the leader of the company, having your sort of ears to the tracks and eyes open to pay attention to that perceived culture is really important. And don't think that your culture is this when signals are telling you that it's something different. What you're perceiving is what the real culture is. So this past summer, we visited Google headquarters in California in Menlo Park or thereabouts, and on the same day visited Microsoft there in Menlo Park. And I can tell you, it was like night and day culture difference of companies that are head-to-head competitors in similar space. But just, you walk in the front entranceway of a company, you can start to feel culture. You can start to see the way they carry themselves. It's the way a company goes into the market and markets itself. It's the way it treats its employees, all that kind of thing. So it's really, really sort of interesting. And your culture, some of the observations that I've made is big culture shifts happen before you know it as the company grows up. So when you're 4 people sitting around an overcrowded 2-room rented office and small lab, and you've got your first $1 million in sales, you're a pretty contained group, versus when you're now breaking through the $25 million barrier and you have 4 offices and multiple design locations and so on and so forth. It's just a whole different beast that is there, and that cultural shift is something you have to pay attention to. The beautiful thing about this country that we're in is the multinational horsepower that we have, and that's both from language capabilities to be an export-strong nation to just the cultural diversity for those potluck lunches that you have on Fridays. Those are just fantastic things that make building companies in Canada really, really fun and enjoyable. From a culture sort of trying to set it or guide it or influence a little bit, my style is candor, and just being, I think the more candid you are and the more open and transparent you are, it just displays a little bit more on the side of integrity, which I think is a key part as you're trying to build up the company. I like to be open on celebrating wins, big and small wins, and also not necessarily even celebrating some of the setbacks or losses from a point of, why did it happen? What did we learn? Let's not do it again, sort of thing. So that's again just part of how you can influence things where people aren't walking around scared out of their pants about making a mistake. They're just more about trying to do whatever they can to help the company succeed. So related to culture is, how do we communicate? How do you communicate inside the team? How does the leader set communication inside the teams? Your personal style is your personal style. I think knowing your style, knowing your biases, knowing your strengths and weaknesses is super important, and play to those and make sure that you don't make exceptions for it. And so if you know that you're always in a lousy mood on Monday mornings, I wouldn't suggest you have all corp, hands-on discussion sessions on Monday mornings, and there's something like that. Open, honest, straightforward, that's easy. But some of the stuff that I've learned is, when there is an issue, when there's a tough conversation that has to be had, either a performance-related one or a missed milestone or something like that, or something delicate, or people that don't get along, you have the tough conversation. Don't avoid it, sticking your head in the sand, hoping it'll go away. Chances are it won't go away. And too many times that hurts rather than helps. So let's get the tough conversations out, and let's have them, and that just helps with with the team dynamics. I like to go hard on the problem and soft, so to speak, on the people. So it's not, lambasting Don Cherry style, some guy that just made an unfortunate mistake, but let's do it more along the way of this is the problem and let's fix the problem and not, call out someone who might be or could have been to blame for it. As you grow up and as you get multiple offices, it's very easy to fall into the trap of forgetting the satellite offices. So you have a small design office in Halifax, and you're always meeting and doing these, mini all-corp sessions in your Toronto office, and, oh yeah, we should conference call the guys in Halifax in. Really try to involve those remote teams, otherwise they get siloed and alienated, and then you lose that team dynamic. So that's something just to keep reminding yourself. Coming back to the setting goals, repeat what I always did at updates and all corp sessions was be almost to the point of crazy repetitive on the 3 goals. Just keep hammering what we're trying to do here and where we are in the process of achieving that. I love to share information on financial, on customers, on profit margin, on bottom line, on this is what we need to do, on we need to raise this money or we're dead. That's good information to share with people because you might as well not candy coat it. It's hard work inside a startup company. You're typically living on the edge. You only have so much runway. Everyone is aware of these potential risks. It bothers people, some people more than others, but being open about it and transparent about it, I think helps. Because chances are that person goes home at night and a spouse or a significant other is saying, man, are you going to be around next month? Is that financing going to close? And if all you can say is, oh, I don't know, we don't know, they're not saying anything, that doesn't help. So let's be as open as you can, obviously, without breaching certain, confidentiality issues that might be in process to a financing round or something like that. So I always like to sort of have both a formal kind of communication a cadence of maybe once a quarter and an informal one once a month or on big event days or whatever, things like that. Now a couple of things about compensation and incentives. Again, a big life lesson learned for me was the fact that I'm always intrigued how engineers talk way more about how much money they make than business people. It's a funny thing, and maybe it's some of my experience is weighted around Ottawa, where a lot of the people typically either worked for Newbridge Alcatel, Nortel, or JDS Uniphase, or some tech company, a Mitel, or some big tech company around Ottawa. And inside those companies, you were 2 years out with an electrical engineering degree, you were a CR2, and if you got promoted to this, you'd be a CR3, and if you're a first-line measurement or manager, you're a CR4, and so on. And CR4s make between $48,900 and $72,300, and people knew that. And everybody knew if you were a CR2, you're making that much money. And so if you, inside your small company, have brought in Susan, who was a key developer that you needed, who had Java experience coming out of the yin-yang, and you decide to pay her 85 grand, and then you hire Billy, who's still an intermediate Java developer but doesn't have maybe that same status, and you're paying Billy 45 grand, you've got such a disparity there that could come back and bite you in the rear. So you really have to be careful about how you set your compensation scheme through the engineering sort of team ranks, well, through the whole company really, but I really find that the transparency on the technical side is a bigger risk than it is on, say, the marketing or the finance side of a company. So with respect to the startup factor that I call around salaries, I have always found that a good rule of thumb has been to be around the 75% mark of market, to get, sort of A players that love the startup energy and the startup sort of environment, but you still, you can get them at that price, but you're still getting some efficiency versus paying the top dollar that maybe Research in Motion is paying in Waterloo, sort of thing. So if you're at the 50% quartile trying to get the top player, chances are you're not going to hit it, maybe unless you have some kind of a wickedly impressive bonus scheme or stock option scheme that is way above market or something like that. But my experience has been around the 75% profile to get top teams. Sort of a trick that is one that I've used pretty effectively is if you identify a real strong person, but they're coming from an experience where they're making more money, they're way too rich for your blood, is just play that card. Say, we love you, we'd love to have you aboard, but you're just too rich. We just can't afford you, so I'm sorry, we're just going to have to, dismiss your application or whatever. And you give that person the opportunity. No, wait, no, I know that, and so sometimes that will at least soften the expectations on salary and get you where you want to be. And again, it's that classic working inside a startup company, the rich reward versus the dollar, blah, blah, blah. You play all those cards when you're trying to build the bench out. On the incentive side, I would recommend a bonus plan company-wide, a bonus plan that is individually targeted, so a sort of a two-tiered bonus plan, and then stock options, and then sort of a fun, not heavily weighted monetary side of the equation. So my typical structure would be one where there's a company-wide target on maybe revenue or gross profit margin or some company goal, number of customers, something along those lines. And then if you exceed that goal, the bonus can be doubled or something along that. And always make these targets somewhat achievable. If they're so pie in the sky and you just have only this chance in 100 to hit it, you're going to find that whole incentive plan is a demotivator rather than a motivator, and then you're in worse trouble than you thought. And that's a bit of a battle too with your investors, because your investors will say, I don't care. You just keep cracking that whip and kicking their butts and get this done and get the cash flow positive, and then you can start paying bigger salaries and taking bonuses. But until you're cash flow positive, forget it. You can't do it. And you have to go, well, I mean, realistically, this company is going to take a 3-year shot before we hit cash flow positive. So let's not fool ourselves. Let's reward ourselves along the way to some extent. But you still want to have that big carrot, obviously, down the road for the folks that have been on the bench and built the company, and when the company finally scales or has that classic exit event where you go out and buy that cottage in the Muskokas. On employee stock option plan and stock options themselves, the only comment I'd make there is don't oversell them at the hiring stage. So some people like to, okay, well, what's the stock option? How many am I getting? What does that represent? Those are all good questions. What's my strike price, and what is the stock option going to be worth in 3 years? And if you're selling it by saying, you know what, we're going to blow the top off this company. It's going to be worth $100 million. That stock option is going to be, each option is going to be worth 20 grand based on our cap table today. And the employee starts going, oh, this is beautiful. So 2.5 years down the road, this employee's been working like crazy, and the exit isn't going to happen at 3 years. It's going to it's still out in the future. And the employee's going, oh man, I was counting on that. What are the options worth? When do I get liquid on these? What good are they to me? And so that can bite you. So you don't oversell them. They're a potential. They're a potential upside, and maybe you can point to different examples and so on and so forth, but just be careful around that. And fun rewards are essential, and bragging rights and winning some stupid ceramic trophy of a frog with a cigar stuck in its mouth is maybe as fun and as rewarding for people as getting a check for $1,500. So don't forget about that. So the reason I wanted to say a couple of things about advisory boards is, again, tied into the context of team and extended team and leveraging team and punching above your weight. And I really believe that advisory boards can help a company punch above the weight, punch above its weight if they're properly structured, if they're properly utilized, and if you have the right people on that advisory board. So an advisory board, as opposed to a formal board, we're not talking about the governance requirements of a formal board of director position that has legal liability and exposure to that company. We're talking about an advisory board where it's purely related to the business. So it could be a technology guru in the space. It could be a marketing and sales person. It could be an HR person. It could be a legal expert that really helps you with contracts and partnerships and agreements and stuff like that. It doesn't matter, but this bench of diverse, experienced advisors can really, really help. And it doesn't have to be a case where you have to all sit there and sit around the table and talk about one particular problem. I've always used advisory boards on a piecemeal basis. So when it was an issue about manufacturing and operations and how do we take this from lab to first product and so on, how do you do that? I'd pull on someone with really strong operations and new product introduction sort of expertise or something like that. So, and then the advisors have to have fun and enjoy it, like the technical challenge or like something about it. So I've always taken advantage of the fact that twice or 4 times a year you have a dinner and you get together and you tell stories and you talk about customers and market and company and team, and you have fun together with the advisor board, and that's a little bit of their payback. Because you're not going to be able to stroke a check at $2,500 per diem for some C-level executive that is sitting on your advisor board. So the typical compensation that I've seen has been stock options, and stock options that vest and are attributed to their efforts to help the company for a period of time. So typically, I've had 3-year sort of advisor positions, and they get a chunk of options in year 1 and a chunk in year 2 and a chunk in year 3, and sometimes small per diems and covering travel expenses and all that kind of stuff. But that's my experience with advisors, and it's been remarkable and really helps. And you can also sort of blow up the pedigree of a company too when you're presenting it to customers and investors that, wow, look at the guys that are in the advisory board, as long as they're not just tokens, as long as they're not figureheads. So, through a due diligence process, if a customer, happens to know that advisor and they call, hey, have you talked to Scientex? Well, you're on their advisory board. Oh, yeah. And you know nothing about it. That's not going to help you at all. So make sure that you are involved in leveraging these people. Now, related to all this, and specifically to tech teams, what are some of the challenges? I've mentioned the investor, the VC influence, and again, that's more of a caution. It's not always the case, but it can happen, is that an investor's interests and an investor's motivation, don't fool yourself. At the end of the day, it's all IRR, return of capital and return of investment, to at least a 20% kind of IRR. So yes, they love the technology. Yes, they are investors in clean tech, and we're a clean tech company, so it doesn't matter. We're here. No, they want to make money. And so if you have challenges, if you're missing milestones, if the team is not performing to expectations, the goals you set aren't happening, that VC investor influence can hit you. So be aware of it is the point there. Some of the other aspects around tech team challenge is that as you get to be year 3 and year 4 in your life cycle, you can't call yourself a startup. You are a young growth company, and you can't blame shortfalls on, oh, we're a startup. And that's both from a customer perspective and an investor perspective and a staff and team perspective. So you have to balance, we can't just say, well, we don't have employee policies because we're a startup. As you grow up, you have to put these pieces in place. And as you grow up and get bigger, the challenge of team and keeping a rope around it and all staying together gets harder and harder and harder. So that's all that kind of evolution of team is something you have to pay attention to, and not just wake up someday and say, holy smokes, we're out of control. So to come back and close off here, I really believe in the 4 pillars of an effective high-performance team relate around communication, alignment, planning, and then delivery. And so at the end of the day, I was doing a little bit of reading last night on this, and there was one thing I was picking up off some Harvard Business Review study or something. It came up that a team that's working together and has focus, and it's focusing on those key goals, it will automatically generate a performance culture, because they know where they're going, they've set their goals, and they're capable, competent people. They automatically get into a point where let's hit it, let's perform, and suddenly you're a small company punching above its weight, and Bob's your uncle. So that's it. That's my perspective on team. Thanks.
Your comments about culture. I am an event planner. I work with companies in creating team building events, meetings with meaning that hopefully either change culture or reinvigorate, say, a sales team, or try to bridge those silos between, between the different departments and so forth.
Yeah.
What do you find is the most effective way of getting that culture tweaked?
Well, I think there's tweaking versus changing is, those are two different beasts. So if you're looking to make some drastic changes in culture, it probably involves significant leadership and management team changes, because unless, if you're already, that culture is as it is, and the leadership and management style is as it is, to make a right turn on that without changing some of the persona and the way that the company communicates to its employees and all that sort of thing, it's not going to happen. So I think it has to happen, first of all, by example at the management level. Tweaks can come when everyone's receptive to change and is interested in making improvements. If there's ways that you can collectively brainstorm and have good inputs and say, these are what we're good at, this is where we fall down and where we're poor, let's attack some of these, let's make some improvements, everybody signs up to it, and you go at it. Those are tweaks and improvements to culture that I think can happen, but it has to be inclusive, it has to have a good communication style to it, and it can't be, hammered down, this is what we're doing now. That'd be my style or my approach.
Thank you.
Hi. I have two questions. The first one, you bring up a really valid point about contractors. But being a startup, I'm finding that that's really the only talent I can attract that is of that level of capability in terms of what you need done. And anything else or anyone else that is willing to work full-time for a startup is probably not at that level of experience that you need, or just not quite the right fit.
Right.
So one of the challenges, like, can you talk more about that challenge? And really, I mean, you touched on it on the presentation, but it is really tough.
So, and I'm not dissing contractors. Like, contractors can sometimes be the most marvelous thing in the planet if say you have an element of your development cycle that is relatively finite, and you need to get to that point, and then once you have your FPGA designed, then you're not going to need them for another 2 revs or something. So you bring in some great FPGA contracting team, get them to do this, say thanks very much, and they're out of here. So it's you can grow and shrink a lot faster with.
And that's the flexibility that.
Yeah,
really
that flexibility of contractors is great. But if these are key bench strength, core people that are generic to what the company needs to be as it grows, you have to get them onto the employment bench.
Okay.
And so that's where you use them. I'm not saying don't or not, but you use them effectively and be aware of the risks and.
Yeah, because I mean, even just to attract talent, I find that that's even kind of like almost a way to introduce yourself and introduce the business to the person to see if they come on.
Sure, but that person, if they have the entrepreneurial startup spirit in their blood, if they're driven by that, and if they see that, holy smokes, we're onto something here. We've got a product. We've got a real opportunity. Then that person themselves will say, hey, I want to get on this bus. Okay. So you obviously want to play that out.
Yeah, totally. And the second part of the question is it too early to start hiring resources and building teams globally? I mean, the internet makes that very easy, and there's a lot of different talent out there. But would you advise against it when you're a startup? It might be too distracting, or is it something that since the market is going global, the earlier you get started, the better?
I guess it depends what functional areas you're talking. If you're talking about sales and marketing and that kind of thing, it's probably never too early. But you also want to leverage some of the abilities of channel partners or distribution channels or strategic partnerships or something to help introduce the.
So from let's say now it's from a technical perspective.
From a technical perspective, if you're talking about some of the benefits, let's say for example around cost-effective offshoring to take advantage of low-cost design geographies,
or just time zone in order to be able to.
Yeah. So. I guess if your market and your customers expect 24/7, always-on capabilities, and you need customer service capabilities to support your product, so you need that Mumbai or Bangalore or whatever Asia Pacific front, then go for it. But it's not easy. Sure, it's distracting and it's tough going into those markets, but yeah.
Okay, thank you.
My question relates to the 3 goals that you're trying to focus and align the team around.
Yeah.
And one of the benefits about being a startup is that you're flexible and adaptive, but you don't want, my understanding is you don't want to change those goals too quickly, or at least without managing the communication, so that way people know and can foresee the goals changing. So I'm just sort of wondering about the change management of.
Well, I think in the very early days, I would say that a startup company makes a critical company decision on maybe not a weekly basis, but I would say probably on at least a monthly basis. And those critical decisions are friggin' like hard rights or hard lefts or stops or whatever. And those decisions don't happen as frequently as a company gets more mature. And so how that relates to the goal setting is the goals that you might set at the beginning of the year as a very, very young company have to evolve and change as new information comes in. And so the fact that you might be changing goals isn't the problem. The key is that the goals are well communicated and everybody understands them and why we're changing it. And it's not that, okay, we set our target to have, if it's we need to have 5 customers by June or we won't get the financing. If you're in May and you say, oh no, let's change it to 2 customers, that's not what I mean. What I mean is that, okay, we could change it to 2 customers if the 2 customers were going to get our big, fat, hairy, good ones, and we were going after, 5 little guys.
Okay, and just to follow up on that, how are the investors and VCs with the goal changes? As long as you have a clear rationality and involve them with why you want to go after or why you're changing the goals, are they generally receptive to that, or are they sort of more?
So again, that's a whole nother discussion on board management and dynamics, and probably relates to communication and the leadership style of the management team and the CEO. But decisions that change your operating plan or your key goal setting that the investors are tracking you on, I think if there is change there, you have to get their buy-in. And so you have to support it with maybe good market data that's new, good customer data that's new, or good technology breakthrough that results in we're doing this because this and this and this, or competitive intelligence that's done this, and this is why we're changing. And we've done our homework, we checked this, we did that, and because of that we're going to be better, and that's why we're doing it. You're not going to get pushback there. But if you're changing because you're schizophrenic and you're not very good at making decisions and holy smokes, I think we're going to do this now, then the investor group will lose confidence in the management team, and that's the kiss of death. As soon as they've lost confidence in the ability to make decisions, then say goodnight, Dick.
Thanks.
Hi. I have a question about results-only work environment. I'm not sure if you've heard about that. It's a system where employers don't control the employees' time at all. They have deadlines. Some things are expected from them, but the assumption is that they're self-motivated. You don't need to see them from 9 to 5 at the desk.
Right.
They'll do their work whenever and they'll do it. Do you think that works for a startup?
I think that if the people are truly self-motivated, if they don't need that, that constant connection and sort of nurturing, and if the goals are clearly understood, the deliverables, are in terms of scope and timing and content and all that sort of thing, if that's clearly understood, then it doesn't matter how it gets done. If they meet that scope and that delivery, then I've never had a problem with it. And technical teams beat to a much different drum than say a marketing or sales team that has to mirror itself to customer schedules and all that. A technical team can work right through the Stanley Cup. I don't care.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, thanks folks, and I'm happy to be in contact from here forward.